gonna make beanatoes today. Beanatoes are beans and tomatoes, onions, and rosemary. I'm gonna use green onions. I got 3 of them today. Normally I'd use 4 for this recipe, but these are super chunky, so I'm just gonna use 3. We're gonna start by opening up our canned beans. You know, I just use canned beans for this recipe because it's delicious, it's rich, the tomatoes impart a lot of flavor on there, but you can cook your own beans if you want to. Get around. Come over to the sink, dump these guys out into a strainer. Dump this guy in here. Right, so our beans are ready for later. And the second thing that I'm gonna wanna strain out are the tomatoes. If they're in their juices, you won't be able to get any kind of color on them at all because you'll have to cook down all the juice first. We really want the tomatoes to be well drained, so I'm gonna shake them around here in the strainer, make sure that I get most of the juices out of them, and squeeze them a little bit. They look about right now, so does my hand. Let's clean up this little mess here. Time to prepare the vegetables. Well, vegetable, I guess in this case. Just wanna cut off the tip because it stinks and it's nasty and slimy and you don't want to eat nasty slime. We're just going to cut them in rings because it's easy. You don't want to keep the tips of the green onions either because they're usually wilted a bit from the store and you don't want to eat anything nasty, but we don't need those either. Then the rosemary, you're going to also want to rinse that off. Shake it really vigorously to get all the extra water off it because the more water you have in the pan, the harder it is to brown things, so we don't like that. When getting the leaves off of rosemary, I just kind of grab it from the place where I see I want, and I pull down and it just takes the leaves off. I think this will be good. And then if I need any more, I can just add it to taste later. And then, I don't know, you can...
put it in your hat?
Yeah, I call it macaroni. We're gonna also chop the rosemary a little bit. No need to get crazy with chopping the rosemary though. Get your pan hot. I'm gonna say about medium heat. Medium means different things on different stoves. You know, if you have a nice like fancy Viking or Wolf range and put it on medium, it's gonna be a lot hotter than, you know, whatever the hell, Frigidaire. Why would you name a brand Frigidaire unless you're making a fridge? Frigidaire. That's what comes out of my butt after I eat ice cream. When I speak, it's a bunch of hot air, okay? And you're gonna wanna put, I don't know, be generous with the olive oil. I'd say probably 2 to 3 tablespoons of olive oil and a little squirt. What you wanna do when you put stuff in the pan is make sure the pan's hot first. I just like to cheat, honestly, because people will tell you to like develop some kind of sense about when it's ready. But honestly, just take 1 piece of the onion, drop it in the pan, and when it starts to sizzle, then you'll know it's ready to put the rest of it in. It should be sizzling like this, but not spattering or making a super loud noise. You just want a nice, gentle sizzle. This is a peaceful kitchen. It's a place to relax and enjoy your life. You don't want to stress out with like flaming oil and arm burns. All right, so let's scoop up these onions and put them in. So we have this really gentle sizzling sound. I like to start with about a half teaspoon of salt. Both beans and tomatoes like to eat salt. You can't really get the fullness of their flavor unless you salt them pretty heavily. And some pepper ground over there. Just in general, whenever you add something to a pan, season it. Stir this around a little bit just to distribute the salt and pepper. Oh, it smells so good.
What would you say to people who don't like this dish?
When I eat beans, I have a gas. Why don't you? See you later, bean tomato. What do you call a green onion with a top 40 hit?
What?
Rapscallion. Oh, I think scallion is just a pretentious way to say green onion, because just say green onion. Everyone knows what you mean when you say green onion. If you don't, then you say scallion, and it's like, well, do you mean chives? So as the green onions get closer to being cooked down, you don't want them to be burning or browning. When the green bits start to turn a darker color and you start to lose a little bit of the plumpness in the white part of the onion, you can add in the rosemary. It'll spatter a little bit when you do this. Make this beautiful noise. Now that they've cooked down and they've gotten nice and soft, and you know I screwed up a little, so there's a little bit of brown bits in there, but that's fine. I'm going to take them out and put them in my little bowl. And I'm gonna strain it back into the pot. And the reason is I'm gonna crank the heat right now, and I don't want lots of burn bits as I get these tomatoes cooked down. The tomatoes are very wet, so they can handle really high heat, but these guys can't because I've had a lot of the moisture cooked out of them. So now I'm gonna turn the heat to, well, basically high. And you're gonna wanna be very attentive to the tomatoes when you do this because you don't want them to burn. I'm gonna dump in the tomatoes, here we go. And now we should get the loud sizzle. We're gonna season our tomatoes too because everyone needs a little bit of seasoning and some more pepper. And you don't wanna leave them still for too long because you've got your burner on high heat and it will burn. It's kind of a little dance. You let it cook for a couple seconds, 10, 15 seconds, and then you push them around a little bit, and you'll start to notice that bits of the tomatoes start to stick to the bottom of the pan, so you want to use your wooden spoon to scrape them up. It's important not to be using a metal utensil unless you have a really robust pan to cook in. All right, so we're going to scrape off of the bottom, and you'll see a lot of moisture leaving the tomatoes right now. So as you go through these cycles of scraping the tomatoes off the bottom of the pan, you'll notice they start to break down, much like I do after I've seen a really sad movie. And your ultimate goal here is just to get them to really almost start turning into a paste, but a chunky paste. We're gonna add a little bit of uncooked liquid back to them to cool it back down. And we'll toss in our beautiful rosemary and green onions with that. And we'll turn our heat way down to a simmer. And then we take our beans, add them to the mix, whoo, stir it on up, and it's a beautiful looking dish. You have these little pops of green in there. Have this guy on simmer. I just want these gentle bubbles. And you can also smash a few of the beans in here to make it a little bit creamy. Let's smash in a loving way. So the tomatoes are no longer completely bright red. They've got a little bit of creaminess to them, but the cream doesn't come from any fat. It's just the beans that have mixed in with it. One of the most important things about this dish is to taste it for salt levels. Both beans and tomatoes can take a lot of salt, and salt has this characteristic where things taste bland, and you start adding salt and it gets a little better, and then it gets really delicious. And if you go just a little bit over that, it plummets. And what you don't want is to be past the end of the salt curve. So that's pretty close. Actually, you know what? Damn, I nailed it. So I was gonna hope that I didn't nail it, because then what I would tell you to do is add a little more salt to the bit you set aside if you don't think it's salty enough. And that way you can kind of taste. So as you get used to checking for salt levels, you don't over salt something immediately. Okay, let's take a little bite of this guy. Oh yeah, it's rich. The beans are creamy, and the tomatoes have this sort of acidy, salty punch. It is a really good dish. I know it sounds weird, but it is one of the best side dishes you can make. So yeah, make some beanatoes.